Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Practitioners Podcast, where we're applying Jesus-style disciple making to everyday life. This episode and all of our episodes are powered by Navigators Church Ministries, which helps churches live out the Great Commission. For more information or to get connected, go to navigatorschurchministries.org. Welcome, friends. We're so excited you're here. We're going to do something today that we've never done here before. We're going to do it in a kind of a different way. If you follow Justin for a long time, one of his gifts is reviewing books. If you've ever been to his blog, justingravett.com, you'll find a whole list of books, and we've never talked about it on the podcast. But today we're breaking through the wall, and we're going to do something we've never done. We're going to talk about a book today that is arguably one of the most influential books in disciple making in the last 5 years. Justin, tell everyone what book we're doing and why we're doing it.
Yeah, so the book that we're going to review today is Practicing the Way by John Mark Comer. First time in 5 seasons, we've talked about any book specifically as a whole episode for sure. And here's why we're doing this. It's because this book is so influential that a lot of churches are looking to the book as a way to set their disciple-making strategy. And in our opinion, that is not the best way to go. Not to say that the book's not good or not whatever. We'll get into all that in a second. But we need to talk about this book because of the influence that it has. And to help those of you out there who maybe have read it, if you haven't read it, I guarantee you, if you're disciple making or within kind of the leadership of the church in any sort of way, you're aware of the book or know people that have read the book and are influenced by it. And so our hope is that we can enter this podcast as a way to discuss the concepts that are unfolded in this book.
One of the things that I've been seeing when churches that I talk to is that they're using the book as their discipleship pathway. And so they're introducing the book early, they're staying with the book, they're often doing the supplemental parts of the book. The kind of the team over there at Practicing the Way has done a great job of putting together a lot of resources that accompany the book. And so if you're familiar with that, then you kind of know what we're talking about. If you're not, I do recommend that you pick up the book. Like, it's a good book to kind of pick up and read and become familiar with. If you're in the disciple making world, which if you're listening to this podcast, we assume that you are, then become familiar with this book, because there are some parts to this that we need to talk about as disciple makers.
Yeah, so Tony said before we hit record that he loves this book. I don't love it as much as Tony does. I gave it a 7 out of 10, although the first half I would give a 9 or 10 out of 10. The first half of this book was amazing. Let me talk to you just a little bit about broadly, 30,000 foot view, what the book is. I would say it's a book primarily about discipleship, not about disciple making. And we've had that conversation in a previous episode, but very briefly, discipleship being how I can grow. Disciple making is how I can grow, plus how I can help other people become mature disciple makers. Again, the first half of the book, though, he's setting up wonderfully the call of Jesus, the mission of Jesus, how Jesus unfolded his calling. And he defines a disciple as an apprentice, and he redefines that. We'll talk about that in a little bit too. But an apprentice or a disciple, in his words, must be with Jesus, become like Jesus, and do what Jesus did. It ties our present situation of Western Christianity to the ancient practice of, the rabbi-disciple relationship or the rabbi-apprentice relationship. Such a great setup. But it's so inexplicable to me how he moves from the first half of the book, which is all that I just said, to the second half of the book. He offers, well, because of all this, now we need to move into these spiritual habits and practices that will help you become more like Jesus. Now, I'm obviously not against spiritual habits, practices, disciplines, but we can't just do that and expect to make disciples the way that Jesus made disciples. So, that's kind of a 30,000 foot view from my perspective of what this book is. But again, it's so influential. You guys need to hear a little bit of the weeds of what the book's about. Tony, what would you add to that? Or what are some of the good things that you saw in the book?
Yeah, I would say that the book is not meant this underneath the summary idea. The book is not meant to just be read in a vacuum. It's meant to be done in community. It's got additional videos. Comer's in a lot of videos. He's got apps. You can practice the disciplines that he talks about in the second half of the book. And so, from my perspective, I think I would agree with Justin on this. There are two different books that live underneath the same cover. The first one is, this is what it means to be a follower of Jesus and to have apprenticeship. The second one is spiritual disciplines that are good for following Jesus. I don't think that they should be put together. Now, again, the good, I love the way he wrestles with the ideas of apprenticeship, disciple making, right? He says the question is not, am I becoming a person? Rather, it's who or what I'm following. He does a great job of quoting Willard. You'll find Willard all over his book. If you love Willard, I think that you're going to love the first half of the book for sure.
That's Dallas Willard.
Yep, Dallas Willard.
Yep.
Sorry. Yep. I kind of assume everybody knows who he is.
Yep.
I wish he was friends of mine, but alas, he writes, there is no problem in human life that apprenticeship to Jesus cannot solve. Boom. That's a mic drop statement there, and I absolutely love it. Dallas Willard says that. And so, I like the idea that your life and your teaching are your credentials. The apprenticeship, that's a whole different topic, but like the idea in the first half of the book is so good. The tools are so good. It's a really good tool to kind of on-ramp people to the dialogue around disciple making.
Yeah, totally agree with that. Those things that he sets out in that first half of the book are really helpful, no matter where you are in your faith journey, whether you're a new believer, whether you're seasoned, an experienced disciple maker. They're just really well laid out, really clearly, articulately. And
Comer
so
does a
I would
great job of making it very, he puts handles on everything for you. So
listen.
if
I
you've
was
never heard
reading
of,
it
yeah,
and I was reading and thinking, man, I wish I would have written some of that. Like it
right,
is really,
right,
really
right,
good. The
100%,
way that first
100%.
half he lays it out. I'm like, this is so well done. So well done. He talks about three goals of an apprentice at the beginning of the book. The goals are to be with your rabbi, to become like your rabbi, and to do as your rabbi did. Now, he pulls this from history of the Jewish rabbi-disciple relationship. Now, part of what he does in the book is he wants to take away our usage of the word disciple, and he wants to relabel disciple as rabbi, or sorry, as apprenticeship. So relabel disciple as apprenticeship. And part of the reason why is because of unfamiliarity. He thinks that apprenticeship is a more familiar term to us in our culture. And, honestly, I could see that. He does say this. He says that disciple or apprenticeship was the pinnacle of the first century Jewish educational system, much like a PhD or graduate program is in our system today. Okay. And I think, honestly, reterming it is okay as he unpacks it, but I don't think it makes it any clearer for us. I think it just places the haziness of terminology in a different spot. In our culture, apprenticeship happens most in trades, right? We apprentice when, we're learning to become a plumber or an electrician or a similar type trade. And that's pretty common in our culture. But the risk is that the listener today believes that discipleship is simply doing what someone else does, as opposed to a more holistic becoming like the person, like the rabbi in their case, were to become. And I think he unpacks that reasonably well to kind of move through that misunderstanding. So, some of the issues that I take later on in the book, it's not here, but it's important for us to know as we're hearing about this book that he relabels the word disciple as apprentice or apprenticeship.
And honestly, this is one of those areas that I find less than ideal, like, or just plainly said, not good. I don't think this is a wise move on Comer's part. He's a gifted writer. He's a gifted explainer. I think the church has some responsibility to use words that we find in scripture. And so you're not going to find apprenticeship that I can think of in scripture, but you will find disciple. You will find, go therefore and make disciples. When we start to take those words out of context, I think it kind of neuters the text a little bit. What we're saying is, hey, we're not gonna use that word that Jesus used very specifically, intently. Instead of learning it, we're just going to pacify it by calling it apprenticeship. Now, I get the idea. Like, I think apprenticeship is a really good way to describe it in a sermon, but to write it down, like, I think it's a good sermon illustration when you're talking about how to define what it means, but you can't. I just don't love. There's a lot of tension inside of me. Now, I've also used the word for 20 years, right? So I get that I'm not a new believer in this dialogue, but I also think that it's my role as a disciple maker to teach people what the word means. And so I just hate to see the church, in this particular case, get rid of the word, or Comer's kind of argument to relabel it instead of doing the work of teaching our way through it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, right? So it's a word that's used in the New Testament 269 times. And so it is a major word, it's a major concept, and it's not unknown to non Christians, right? We normally hear it in a coaching context or sports context, sometimes in musicians, we'll say he's a disciple of somebody. And so, yeah, I'm with you. I think I would rather we just teach people through that and help them understand the biblical language that's being used. Now, the next thing that I want to bring up, Tony, is Comer makes a big deal in the book of saying that the word disciple is a noun, not a verb. And I want to quote from him here. And if you have the book out or if you get it, it's just on page 12. He says this. He says, disciple is a noun, not a verb. Whatever translation you adopt, disciple, apprentice, practitioner, student, follower, let me state the obvious. People regularly ask me, who are you discipling or who discipled you? But as far as I can tell, not one time in the entire New Testament is disciple used as a verb. Not once. Grammatically speaking, then, to use disciple as a verb is bad form. He continues. He says, people have come to me actually bitter because their former pastors did not disciple them. What they usually mean is that these pastors didn't spend one-on-one time with them. While I'm all for pastors giving their time to foster people's growth in Jesus, I would argue that you can't disciple somebody any more than you can Christian them, believer them, or follower them. Now, one last couple sentences I'll read because he's bringing up something really significant when he is trying to point to it's a noun, not a verb, and it has implications. He continues, just the last few sentences, and we'll comment more fully. Please hear me. This isn't just semantics. Language matters. Here's why. If disciple is something that is done to you, parentheses, a verb, then that puts the onus of responsibility for your spiritual formation on someone else, like your pastor, church, or mentor. But if disciple is a noun, if it's someone you are or are not, then no one can disciple you but Rabbi Jesus himself. Okay, big idea. And this idea shapes a lot of what happens throughout the book. And in my opinion, where he lands in the second half of the book. Because if you cannot be discipled by anyone else, then that also means, Tony, that you can't disciple anyone else. And so we're sidelining this whole thing of discipling others or helping them grow. And it presents a problem for Comer that I don't think he's able to resolve even in the book. And the problem is this, that, if the whole point of discipleship is to become a rabbi yourself, which again, do what your rabbi did, right, which he presented, then what do we call the process or the action that the rabbi does with the disciples? Comer runs into this exact problem because he writes himself into a corner where he needs to use the word apprentice in a verb form, and he does it. Now, the first time he does it, he slips it into the footnotes, and it's right on the same page that he's having this discussion. But he also does it a couple other times through the book. So if apprentice and disciple are nouns, English still demands a verb form to communicate that the action a rabbi or a master takes with that person that they're leading or training. Historically, we've called it discipling. But he's right. The scriptures don't use that form, but we have to have some word there. English demands it. And so this is a big deal in the book. And if we don't think carefully about it, it's easy just to nod our head through that section. And we're buying into a whole set of things if we just nod our heads through it that give us some problems later on in terms of, well, what does it mean then to make disciples? Right? Tony, how do you react to that section and kind of what he's doing there?
Yeah, I get what he's saying when it comes to the native biblical language, but I think that we also have to take into account the language that we're speaking and more importantly, the language he's writing in. And so because the English demands the verb, then it's necessary for us to consider the verb form. I also think that we can language does matter, but also the big picture matters too. So I immediately thought of when John sent his disciples to go follow Jesus, right? That whole premise, those men were following John. John sent them to go follow Jesus. That we see some of the same language in both places, right? And so go follow that person, go and make disciples, right? The language to me in the text is clear that it's something that we do with other people because I think we run into a problem when you start looking at Paul and the way Paul talks about Timothy, my spiritual son in the faith. The way First and Second Timothy is Paul's like beautifully written letter to Timothy about his spiritual growth.
Yeah.
That's not, he doesn't sit that one out. We don't leave that out of the canon. I think that there's some, well, I understand the somatic, kind of the language part of what he's talking about, the verb part, and I do believe that it's a both and, it's not an either or. Right.
Yeah.
So I think you can be a disciple and make disciples in the English language as much as you can, um, as you can just be a disciple or make disciples separately.
Yeah, and if we're supposed to do what Jesus did and he made disciples, like, I mean, that wasn't just like some tangential thing he was doing. That's very central to his mission. Now, the problem that I think he's reacting to, and I think he's being a bit reactionary here to like kind of throw the whole verb form out, is people coming to him and saying, well, this guy didn't disciple me, or I've never been discipled. And the way that I handle that is I say, well, is it a luxury or a need to be discipled? And I think the scriptures would say it's a luxury to be discipled by another human being. The scriptures tell us in Second Peter 1, 3, and 4 that we have everything we need for life and godliness. And so if we already have everything we need, we can't point at somebody else or point at our circumstances and say, well, I'm immature. And I'm immature because that pastor didn't disciple me or nobody discipled me, right? Another passage in Timothy says, train yourself to be godly, right? And so that onus or responsibility rests with us, and it can rest with us in terms of our own spiritual development without throwing out the idea that, we can't disciple somebody else or, that that's not a thing we should be doing. But I think that impacts the second half of the book because if you have a paradigm where no one can disciple anybody else, then the only way we can really be like Jesus, or the predominant ways, would be in our morals and in our practices of connecting with Jesus and God the Father, right? Which leads into the second half of the book, which is all of the spiritual practices and disciplines.
Let me
For
also
me,
say
it's a
this,
both and.
right? Like I think we get into a little bit of a kind of a paradox too, because he's essentially teaching the practices, right? With all of the tools, it almost feels counterintuitive to what the argument is. Like, why not just list them out? Why do we need to be in small group? Like, why do we like if I just it just again he writes himself into a corner in my opinion, and he's a beautiful writer, so he's gifted, but I think there's some boxing in that happens here that I don't think is great for disciple making as a movement.
Yes. Yep. Yep. I agree. All right. One other one. Maybe we'll do two other ones. So we're going to go a little bit long in this episode because there's so much to cover, but also because I know there's going to be a lot of people interested in this discussion. He says something towards the middle of the book. It's actually on page 48. That he presents something new and he kind of slips it in. I don't know if he knows that it's new in the disciple making world. And he doesn't really support it. But here's what he says. He says, the goal of number two, and number two is like transformation, right? It's not all that. How do we become like Jesus? He says. A full answer would take a book. But here's the Sparks Notes version through contemplation. we let God love us into people of love. And so the question he's answering, how do we become like Jesus? His condensed answer is through contemplation, and that if we let God love us into people of love, that's how we become transformed people of God. Now, in all my experience reading, understanding, there's three main paradigms for discipleship. One is knowledge based, right? That we are going to be transformed by what we know. And so what we know shapes what we do and believe, et cetera, et cetera. The other one is obedience based, that we are changed through our actions. And the more we conform to what God asks us to do, the more we become like him. And the third one's more relationship based, that we become more like Christ in community as we bump into other people and our sins come out and their sins come out. And then we have to figure it out together. Um, I've heard all of these, and I think, all of these have truth in them. This is the very first time I've heard of a fourth one, being contemplation. Now, maybe I should have heard of it, but it's not out. People aren't writing those books around contemplation. And I wish here he would have unpacked that more, because I would have liked to have seen where he would root that in scripture, and the life and ministry of Jesus. He kind of slips it in, and so I want to just pull it out and say, hey, for our listeners, for anyone else that's interested, this is a really interesting thing that he's proposing that I think is worth us thinking about and maybe even considering, like, what would the scriptures have to say about that?
Yeah, and so here's the hard part, right? Is that I can kind of see some ideas that he's pulling on, but because he doesn't pull them all the way, it becomes a little problematic, right? Contemplation, the idea of Jesus sitting with the Father in the morning, solitude time, which he talks about quite a bit in the book, and it's one of those things where it's like, oh, it's right there. But he doesn't really pull it all the way through. And I also, this is theologically, I don't know if my own thoughts lead me to Jesus by myself.
Yep. Mine
I'm
do.
such a naturally sinful person that I don't know that I believe, like, my own contemplation tends to lead me towards sinful things, and maybe it's just me, right? I'm willing to accept that, like, but I've not found now contemplating on Jesus. The problem is I just have this really bad habit of remaking Jesus in my own image. So I don't know. I just struggle with it. Like,
Yeah.
I like the book as an on-ramp to the discussion around disciple making. And I think I recommend that if you want to start talking about some of the basic ideas of disciple making, it's a great book to get.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a good statement to kind of lead us into a wrap up here of, this book is the first half really, really strong. And if you go into the book knowing what to expect from it and what it is and what it's meant to be, it really just helps a lot. I would recommend against any church or church leaders looking to the book as a way to implement disciple making or to grow a disciple making culture in your church through, hey, let's read the book, let's start focusing on these different practices and habits. Now, that's not a bad thing to do, but honestly, it's kind of what churches have been doing for decades,
Yeah,
right?
we call it sanctification.
Yeah. And so obviously we should be doing those things. But if you expect that doing those things is going to lead to people developing vision, heart, and skill around going out and discipling other people, I think you're going to be really disappointed in it. Um, so for me, yeah, this is a really strong, really good book about discipleship, not great for disciple making. Um, action step, Tony, I would say that my action step is, hey, you should be regularly reading disciple making books. If you want to grow as a disciple maker, man, I still try to always have a book that I'm reading about disciple making, and I just try to think about it and what they're saying and where are the points that we agree on. What's the arguments of things that I'm like, I don't see it that way. And sometimes I'm persuaded. I'm like, well, yeah, I really need to shift there. There's other times where I'm just like, I just can't get there. And even that exercise of reading and considering and thinking and talking about it with friends can really be helpful for your own development as a disciple maker. Tony,
Yeah,
what
well,
final thoughts do you have for us?
I'll just say this, like, in my experience, books never make disciple makers.
Yep.
It doesn't matter what the book is,
Yeah.
right? I had read even the scriptures, right? Even the scriptures, which are incredible and transformative in so many ways. They led me to Jesus in profound ways. They didn't help me take the leap into disciple making until I was with another human to talk about the scriptures with. And so your discipleship pathway is going to be the same thing, right? Like it requires people. It requires people leaning in. You can't give someone a book. Um, hey, quick question. I know how much you love when I put you on the spot.
Yeah.
The number one book you recommend in disciple making? I'll go first. Master Plan of Evangelism.
Well, that's so annoying that you went first because that's what I would have said.
I know because you discipled me.
Um, I don't have a book review on that yet, but it will be published soon. So actually, by the time this comes out, it might be published. So look for that. But yeah, that's the
Second
number one.
second
That's a
favorite book.
tremendous gold
Second
standard.
favorite book.
Master Plan of Evangelism.
Now, what's your second one? Like, what's your
Oh,
second?
second one. I'm torn between two. One would be The Lost Art of Disciple Making by
Oh,
Leroy
that's a good one.
Imes.
Yeah, yeah.
The other one would be Organic Discipleship, I think. I'd have to look up here. Yeah.
Of course, it's hard not to mention Bill Murray's book, Ways of the Alongsider.
Yes.
It's a
Tremendous book.
phenomenal book on the practice of it, and always a good place to start. So many
Yeah.
great things. I do think that that's our action step for this episode. Find a book on disciple making, read it, wrestle with it. Email us if you have questions about it, or you want to debate us if you think you're wrong. If we think we're wrong, tell us. We're open to it. We understand everybody's got an opinion, and we're always open to the dialogue with our practitioner family. We're so thankful for you. As always, don't forget to hit that subscribe button wherever you listen to podcasts or on YouTube. And until next time, continue to make disciples who make disciples.